The person you keep thinking about truly does hold care for you deep inside their heart, but the reason for the distance between you might surprise you in a way you didn't expect. Take a slow breath before you continue, because this message carries emotional weight, not something light or casual. It reaches into that quiet space where two people feel something strong but rarely say it out loud. If you've been wondering why they don't fully come closer, stay with this carefully. This is not random. When someone stays in your thoughts again and again, not once in a while but almost constantly, there is always a deeper emotional reason behind it. And if silence or distance has grown between you, whether emotional, physical, or both, understand this clearly. What you see on the surface is not the full truth. Stay with me till the end, because this changes how you see everything. The first thing you need to understand is this: they do care about you, but not in a loud or obvious way. Their feelings are not expressed through constant messages, dramatic words, or big emotional displays. Instead, their care shows up quietly, in subtle thoughts, in remembered details, in moments they replay in their mind when no one is watching. They remember your voice, your expressions, and even small things you might have forgotten. And no, this is not someone who has simply moved on easily. They carry fragments of your presence with them in everyday life. But here's where it becomes complicated. Deep emotions don't always pull people closer right away. Sometimes they do the opposite. Stay with me. This is where it gets important. When feelings become intense, they can trigger fear instead of comfort. Real connection often makes a person aware of their own emotional gaps, past wounds, and insecurities they never fully dealt with. So instead of stepping forward, they pause. They pull back. Not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much at once. You reflect things inside them they are not fully ready to face. Their mind starts questioning everything. Am I enough? Can I handle this? What if I disappoint them? These thoughts create pressure, and when emotion feels heavier than clarity, distance becomes their coping mechanism. So the silence you see is not emptiness, it is internal overload. From your side, this distance feels confusing. You might think they don't care or that they have lost interest, but internally, something very different is happening. They are stuck between wanting closeness and fearing the responsibility that comes with it. Love starts to feel like pressure when someone doubts their own emotional stability. So instead of risking mistakes, they choose space, not because they want to hurt you, but because they are trying to avoid hurting you later. They may even believe you deserve someone more stable, more consistent, more emotionally ready. Stay with me. This inner conflict is stronger than it looks from outside. Inside their mind, there is a constant battle. One part of them wants to reach out, talk normally, and return to the connection. Another part tells them to hold back, to wait, to protect themselves from possible emotional failure. So they pause, hesitate, disappear, and reappear in cycles. And during that silence, they are not empty. They are overthinking, replaying conversations, rechecking memories, analyzing every detail. What seemed like calm distance from the outside is actually internal noise. Their feelings don't disappear, they just become invisible. And yes, this creates confusion for you, because love that is not expressed clearly becomes difficult to read. Now, here is something important about you in this connection. The reason you keep thinking about them is not random either. Emotional bonds do not break cleanly when something feels unfinished. Your mind keeps returning because there was no clear closure, no final emotional ending, no complete resolution. So your thoughts circle back again and again, trying to understand what was left open. You replay moments, imagine different outcomes, and search for meaning in the silence. Stay with me. This is not weakness. It is your mind trying to complete an unfinished emotional pattern. At the same time, their distance is not proof of absence, and your thoughts are not proof of obsession. Both sides are dealing with an emotional loop that was never fully expressed. They withdraw because they feel too much pressure internally. You think about them because your mind still feels the emotional echo of what was never fully completed. This creates a push and pull effect. One side steps back, the other reaches inward, and the gap between you becomes a space filled with unanswered feelings rather than true absence. Stay with me. This is the core of the situation. In the end, what you are experiencing is not simple rejection or lack of care. It is two people dealing with emotions they don't fully know how to handle at the same time. Their silence carries fear, not indifference. Your thoughts carry connection, not confusion alone. And the distance between you reflects emotional overload, not emotional emptiness. If they ever return, It will not be because feelings disappeared and came back, but because fear finally loosened its hold. Until then, understand this clearly. Real emotion is still present, just unspoken, hidden behind hesitation, doubt, and inner conflict. Stay calm with this truth. What is real does not always stay loud, but it does not disappear easily either. They show that the shared experience carried real meaning and that the connection does not disappear just because contact becomes irregular. Real bonds do not rely only on physical presence. They continue in invisible ways that shape how you feel, think, and respond inside. Every silent phase and every moment of distance often has a purpose, even if it is not obvious at first. Sometimes space is not punishment, it is preparation. It builds patience, emotional strength, and a deeper understanding of yourself. It pushes you to sit with your own feelings instead of escaping them. And if you are still here listening, stay with this, because this part explains a lot. Your thoughts return again and again, not because you are stuck, but because something inside you recognizes unfinished emotional energy. Love does not always move in straight lines. It bends, pauses, and circles back when things are incomplete. The mind keeps revisiting what was left open, trying to understand, trying to resolve, trying to make sense of silence. The connection between you still feels alive in memory and emotion. It does not fully vanish. It waits in the background of your awareness, asking for acceptance, understanding, and sometimes forgiveness from both sides. And yes, this is where most people get confused, because silence feels like absence, but it often is not. In this waiting space, something subtle begins to develop within you. You start learning patience without even realizing it. You begin to notice your own emotional patterns more clearly. You understand what you feel, not just what you think. This experience teaches you to hold emotions without forcing quick answers. And stay with me here. This is important because many people miss this lesson. Your mind keeps returning not only because of attachment, but because your deeper self senses that timing, healing, and readiness matter more than immediate closure. So the loop continues, not as punishment, but as inner processing. The emotional connection you felt carries a kind of living imprint. It does not simply end because communication slows down. It stays active in memory, in feeling, and in thought. You may notice unexpected moments when their presence returns in your mind, quiet nights, small triggers, or random reminders. And yes, they also think about you in similar hidden moments. They wonder what you are doing, how you are feeling, and what might have happened if fear had not stepped in. But hesitation blocks expression. Fear interrupts action. So instead of moving closer, they pause, withdraw, and overthink everything. This pause is not emptiness. It is inner overload. They replay conversations, rethink decisions, and imagine different outcomes. But imagination does not always lead to action. Sometimes it increases doubt. The more they feel, the more they hesitate. And here is the truth many people miss. When someone feels deeply, it can actually slow them down instead of pushing them forward. So the space between you becomes a place where emotions exist but remain unspoken. Stay with me, because this is where understanding begins to shift. From your side, this silence can feel like rejection or confusion, but from their side, it is often emotional pressure mixed with fear of not being enough. You reflect something inside them they were not prepared to face fully, not because you are overwhelming, but because the connection feels real enough to require responsibility. And responsibility triggers doubt in someone who is unsure of their own emotional stability. So they step back, not to end things, but to avoid doing damage while they feel uncertain inside. This distance also becomes a form of self-protection. They may believe they are not ready to meet your emotional depth. They compare themselves to what they think you deserve, and instead of stepping forward imperfectly, they choose silence. This creates an internal conflict, wanting closeness but fearing failure at the same time. And stay with this part, because it matters. The stronger the feeling, the stronger the hesitation can become when someone lacks emotional confidence. At the same time, your mind continues to revisit them because closure never fully formed. Unfinished emotional experiences create repetition in thought. You replay memories, imagine conversations, and search for meaning in what was not said. This is not weakness. It is the mind trying to complete what was emotionally interrupted. And when both sides remain connected in feeling but disconnected in expression, the loop continues silently between thought and silence. Over time, this experience becomes something deeper than just a connection. It becomes a lesson in emotional awareness. You begin to see how love can exist alongside fear, how care can exist alongside silence, and how distance can hold meaning without being emptiness. You also begin to realize something important. Your value is not reduced by someone else's unreadiness. If they are unable to stay consistent, it reflects timing and inner readiness, not your worth. So instead of forcing answers, this space teaches acceptance. Instead of rushing closure, it builds understanding. And instead of confusion, it slowly leads toward clarity. If they ever return with stability, it will not be because feelings suddenly appeared again, but because fear finally softened. Until then, the connection remains in a quiet form, not gone, not complete, but still part of emotional history that shaped you. And here is the final truth to hold on to. Love does not always survive in constant presence, but it also does not disappear just because it becomes quiet. Sometimes it transforms, sometimes it waits, and sometimes it teaches you how deeply you can feel without losing yourself. Stay grounded in that understanding, because this experience is not just about them, it is also about what you are becoming through it. They reflect that the shared experience carried genuine importance, and that the bond does not simply disappear just because communication becomes less frequent. Real emotional connections are not limited to physical presence or constant contact. They continue in subtle, invisible ways that quietly shape your inner world, your thoughts, and even your emotional reactions. Every silent phase and every stretch of distance often carries a hidden purpose, even if it is not easy to understand at the moment. Sometimes space is not rejection, it is preparation. It builds patience, emotional resilience, and a deeper awareness of your own heart. It forces you to sit with your emotions instead of escaping them quickly. And stay with this thought for a moment, because this is where real understanding begins to open up. Your mind does not return to them by accident or weakness. It returns because something inside recognizes unfinished emotional energy that was never fully expressed or resolved. Love does not always move forward in a straight, clean line. It bends, pauses, and circles back when something feels incomplete or unclear. The mind naturally replays moments, conversations, and emotions in an attempt to understand what was left unsaid. The connection still feels alive in memory and emotion, even if silence now exists. It remains present in the background of your awareness, quietly asking for understanding, acceptance, and sometimes emotional closure from both sides. Stay with me here, because this part explains why letting go feels so complicated. In this waiting space, something important begins to develop inside you without you even noticing it fully. You begin to learn emotional patience in a deeper way. You start observing your own reactions, your thoughts, and your emotional patterns more clearly than before. You no longer just feel, you begin to understand how you feel. This experience teaches you to hold emotion without forcing immediate answers or rushing into conclusions. And listen carefully here, because this is the part most people miss completely. Your thoughts keep returning, not only because of attachment, but because your deeper self senses that timing, readiness, and emotional healing cannot be forced. So the cycle continues, not as punishment, but as inner processing that slowly reshapes your understanding. The emotional imprint of this connection does not fade quickly. It stays active in memory, in subtle emotion, and in unexpected thoughts that appear during quiet moments. You may notice it more at night, during silence, or when something small reminds you of them without warning. And yes, they also experience similar moments in their own way. They think about you when life slows down, when silence gets heavy, or when something triggers a memory they did not expect. But fear steps in before action. Doubt interrupts expression, so instead of reaching out, they pause, withdraw, and overanalyze everything internally. Stay with this truth, because this is where confusion usually begins on both sides. This pause is not emptiness at all. It is emotional overload mixed with hesitation. They replay conversations, rethink decisions, and imagine different versions of what could have been said or done. But overthinking does not always create clarity. It often increases uncertainty. The more they feel, the more careful they become. And the more careful they become, the harder it is to act. So, what you experience as silence is actually internal noise that never becomes visible. From your side, it looks like distance, but from their side, it feels like pressure, doubt, and emotional conflict happening all at once. Stay with this, because it changes how you interpret the silence. From their perspective, this distance often comes from fear of not being enough or not being emotionally stable enough to maintain what they feel. You bring out something real inside them, something deep, something they did not fully prepare for. And instead of stepping forward imperfectly, they step back to avoid making mistakes they fear they cannot fix later. This creates a strong inner conflict, wanting closeness but fearing failure at the same time. The stronger the emotional pull becomes, the stronger the hesitation grows if self-doubt is present. And watch this carefully, because this is where most misunderstandings happen. At the same time, your mind continues to return to them because the emotional story was never given proper closure. Unfinished connections naturally create loops in thought. You revisit memories, replay situations, and imagine different outcomes, trying to find meaning in what was left incomplete. This is not emotional weakness. It is the brain trying to resolve something that ended without clarity. When one side withdraws and the other side still feels connected, the emotional loop remains active, so both distance and thought continue feeding each other in silence. Over time, this experience becomes more than just a connection. It becomes a lesson in emotional awareness and self-understanding. You begin to see how love can exist alongside fear, how care can exist alongside silence, and how distance does not always mean absence. You also begin to understand something important. Your value is not determined by someone else's readiness or inability to stay consistent. If they step back, it reflects their timing, their healing process, and their internal state, not your worth or your emotional depth. Stay with this final truth because it is important. So instead of forcing closure, this experience slowly teaches acceptance. Instead of rushing answers, it builds patience. Instead of confusion, it gradually brings awareness. If they ever return with clarity, it will not be because feelings suddenly appeared, but because fear loosened its hold and understanding matured. Until then, the connection remains in a quiet form, still present in memory, still alive in emotional trace, but waiting for balance. And remember this clearly: love does not always stay loud or visible, but it does not disappear easily either. Sometimes it transforms into silence, sometimes into distance, and sometimes into lessons that shape who you become next. They reflect that the shared experience carried real and lasting importance, and that the bond between you does not simply disappear just because communication becomes less frequent or contact slows down. Real emotional connections are not limited to constant presence or visible effort. They continue in quiet, hidden ways that shape your inner world, your thoughts, your reactions, and even the way you interpret silence itself. Every silent phase and every stretch of distance often carries a deeper purpose, even if it is not immediately clear. Sometimes space is not rejection at all. It is emotional preparation, slow healing, and unseen inner adjustment. It builds patience, emotional strength, and a deeper awareness of your own heart. It forces you to sit with feelings instead of escaping them quickly. And stay with this carefully, because this is where understanding starts to shift in a powerful way. Your mind does not return to them randomly or by mistake. It returns because something inside recognizes unfinished emotional energy that was never fully expressed, understood, or completed. Love does not always move forward in a straight or predictable path. It bends, pauses, circles back, and reappears in thought when something feels incomplete. The mind naturally replays memories, conversations, emotions, and moments in an attempt to understand what was left unsaid or unresolved. The connection still feels alive in memory and emotion, even when silence now replaces communication. It remains active in the background of your awareness, quietly asking for understanding, acceptance, and sometimes emotional closure that was never fully given. Stay with this moment, because this is where emotional confusion begins to make sense. In this waiting space, something deeper begins to form inside you without you consciously noticing it at first. You start developing emotional patience in a way you never had to before. You begin to observe your own reactions more carefully, noticing patterns in your thoughts, feelings, and expectations. You stop reacting only on impulse and start understanding your emotions layer by layer. This experience teaches you to hold emotional uncertainty without forcing immediate answers or rushing into conclusions just to feel control. And stay with this carefully, because this is one of the most important realizations here. Your thoughts return not only because of attachment, but because your deeper self senses that timing, readiness, emotional maturity, and healing cannot be forced into speed. So the cycle continues, not as punishment, but as internal processing that slowly reshapes your emotional awareness. The emotional imprint of this connection does not fade easily or quickly. It stays active in memory, in emotional reflex, and in unexpected thoughts that appear during quiet moments when your mind is not distracted. You may notice it more at night, in silence, or when something small triggers a memory you did not consciously invite. And yes, they also experience similar hidden moments in their own way. They think about you when life slows down, when distractions disappear, or when something reminds them of what was shared. But fear often steps in before action. Doubt interrupts expression. So instead of reaching out, they pause, withdraw, and overanalyze everything internally. Stay with this truth, because this is where both sides quietly suffer without showing it. This pause is not emotional emptiness at all. It is internal overload mixed with hesitation, fear, and unresolved feeling. They replay conversations repeatedly, rethink decisions, and imagine different outcomes where things went differently or more safely. But overthinking does not bring clarity. It often multiplies confusion. The more they feel, the more careful they become. And the more careful they become, the harder it is for them to take action. So what looks like silence from your side is actually internal noise from theirs. From the outside, it feels like distance, but from the inside, it feels like emotional pressure, uncertainty, and conflict happening at the same time. Stay with this understanding because it completely changes how you see the situation. From their perspective, this distance often comes from fear of not being enough or not being emotionally stable enough to handle what they feel for you. You awaken something real inside them, something deep, something honest, something they were not fully prepared to manage. And instead of stepping forward imperfectly, they step back to avoid mistakes they fear could hurt both of you later. This creates a strong internal conflict, wanting closeness but fearing failure at the same time. And the stronger the emotional pull becomes, the stronger the hesitation grows when self-doubt is present. This is where most misunderstandings are born, because love and fear start moving in opposite directions inside the same person. At the same time, your mind continues returning to them because the emotional experience never reached proper closure. Unfinished connections naturally create looping thoughts. You revisit memories, replay conversations, imagine different endings, and try to make sense of silence that had no clear explanation. This is not emotional weakness. It is the mind trying to resolve what was left incomplete. When one person withdraws emotionally while the other still feels connected, the loop continues without resolution. So both silence and thought keep feeding each other, creating a cycle that feels endless, but is actually unresolved emotion seeking completion. Over time, this experience becomes more than just a connection. It becomes a deep emotional lesson. You begin to see how love can exist alongside fear, how care can exist alongside silence, and how distance does not always mean absence. You also begin to realize something important. Your value is not defined by someone else's readiness, consistency, or ability to stay present. If they step back, it reflects their emotional timing and internal state, not your worth, not your depth, and not your ability to be loved. Stay with this truth because it is grounding and necessary. So instead of forcing closure, this experience slowly teaches acceptance. Instead of rushing answers, it builds emotional patience. Instead of confusion, it gradually creates awareness and inner clarity. If they ever return with stability, it will not be because feelings suddenly appeared again, but because fear finally softened and emotional readiness grew stronger. Until then, the connection remains in a quiet form, still present in memory, still active in emotional trace, still real in impact but paused in expression. And remember this clearly, love does not always stay loud, visible, or direct, but it does not disappear easily either. Sometimes it transforms into silence, sometimes into distance, and sometimes into deep inner lessons that shape the way you love forever.